This is John Haller. I'm doing an Israel update. I'm going to welcome my special guest, Jonathan Feldstein from the Genesis 12:3 Foundation. He's been with us before. Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you, John. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me back.
Why don't you just sort of, since it's been a few months, I know we met when you were up in Michigan. I think that might have been the last time, and that's been, goodness, almost 5 months ago. It's amazing how the time has passed since October 7th, because now we're approaching 10 months almost. Correct. Since those attacks occurred. So why don't you just tell us a little bit, remind us a little bit about what Genesis 12:3 Foundation does, what your purpose is, and where people can go to find more information.
Sure. About it. Thank you. Okay, so the Genesis 123 Foundation has a great, unique purpose to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel. But we always say in ways that are new, unique, and meaningful. What that means is I don't want to be the next Orthodox Jew teaching Torah to Christians or trying to compete with existing other ministries or Jewish organizations that are building bridges in their own way. I'm always looking for things that are new, that are different. And just quickly, not as a commercial appeal, but rather to give it a sense of how we approach that. When we started back in 2017, the first project that we did is called Run for Zion, runforzion.com. It's the first Christian program around the Jerusalem Marathon. 4 years ago, and that's a tremendous success, except we got impeded by the COVID pandemic. And then during the COVID pandemic, I started a webinar series called Inspiration from Zion, which was so successful that I was invited to spin that off to a podcast where I'm the only Orthodox Jew to be a podcast host on the Charisma Podcast Network with a weekly program about and from Israel. Matter of fact, just before getting on with you, I recorded my next episode that's coming out this week. But that's fun and that's interesting, and it's great to have that unique audience approaching all kinds of different topics. Although, full disclosure, I think since October 7th, just about every topic has been somewhat war-related or not. 2 weeks before the war, we began, we published the brand new, magnificent book called Israel the Miracle. People can have a look at that at israelthemiracle.com. And what that is, it's a compilation of essays published as a coffee table book with magnificent photos and paintings that were all donated by the artist, 75 essays by Christian leaders all over the world, writing about, thank you for putting that up, writing about why Israel is significant to them. And it has people of multiple denominations, not all of them, because Christians have too many denominations, certainly people from multiple ethnic groups from all continents except Antarctica, aging from 20s till 90s. And it's really spectacular to hear the voices of Christians from all over the world writing about that. This has been now already in its second printing. It's been going that well. People want to get it. I want to offer you and anyone who's following you to go to israelthemiracle.com, but use Jonathan 10 as the coupon code to get 10% off, just as my gift. And then the last thing that I'll say, since October 8th, we launched our Israel Emergency Campaign. And you've seen it, John. Everyone sees there are a lot of fundraising efforts. There's many needs here in Israel as a result of the war. But one of the things that I always maintain is it can't always be about fundraising. We're genuinely building bridges. It can't just be objectifying Christians as a faith-based ATM, finding the easiest way to take money out and not even say thank you. So we've piloted several really unique initiatives since the war. Most unique, and I'm still getting praise for it, was in May, on May 15th, which is the day our enemies observe, called Nakba Day, the catastrophe of Israel's birth. We ended up having right there you go, that's our website, genesis123.co. We ended up having the global prayer for Israel, which brought Jews and Christians together from all over the world for 6 hours, praying together, praying that the hostages would be released, praying for the success and safety of the IDF. And this is so important, praying for God to change the hearts of our enemies. And I guess the last thing I'll say, since you have this up, if people look at the icon on the right side, Solution for Peace in Gaza, so that is our latest initiative, which is so bold, me as an Orthodox Jew calling, which is true, John, we'll talk about it, the only solution for peace in Gaza is actually changing hearts. And who can go into Gaza and change hearts? It's Christians. So I refer to my army of 100,000 or 200,000 Christians who will go into Gaza and be responsible for the complete restoration. So this is all just to give you an idea of the very broad things that the Genesis 123 Foundation is involved with. And people, of course, are welcome to contact us through this website, solutionforpeaceingaza.com or genesis123.co.
Ask you a little bit more about the solution, because you've written a couple articles. I think we talked about the one back in February, and then you had one in the Washington Times last week. So I want to kind of end up with that kind of a positive call to action, or maybe a prayer, given the situation that we're facing. But let's talk first about what's the current situation. A lot of things yesterday in my update. Yesterday, I talked about the attack in Majal Shams and whether Israel's going to respond. And there's a lot of back and forth today. So what's going on there currently?
Right. So there's no question that Israel's going to respond. The question is what and how, and what the consequences of that will be. Since the massacre on Saturday, where Hezbollah shot a rocket with a 50-kilo warhead, a 50-kilo explosive warhead it couldn't have gone more than 10 miles from southern Lebanon into the Golan Heights, landing straight in the middle of a Druze soccer field, killing 12 kids. There has been sporadic incidences in the north, rockets continuing today, Israeli strikes strategically. But the sense is something bigger is going to happen. My belief, and I don't say this with any knowledge or any expertise, but my belief is that whatever our response will be measured in the sense that it will be as big a response as we can push without pushing over the threshold to break out into a complete escalation of all-out war and our requiring a massive airstrikes and ground invasion and Hezbollah firing off thousands of rockets a day out of their at least 150,000 rockets and precision missiles, in addition to all of the drones, which have been very hard to fight against. Certainly something is going to happen, but I would argue that as much as everyone's tried to continue to hit back at one another, Hezbollah firing rockets, occasionally a rocket injures somebody or kills somebody. On Saturday, that rocket killed 12 people and injured dozens. I don't think that they tried to do that, yet ironically, that could be the trigger that brings the full escalation. And even if Israel's response is measured, that measured response could still trigger a full escalation, both from Hezbollah and from Iran. There have been, I will add this, there have been, to my knowledge, no additional army or government instructions to people in the north or to the rest of the country to be particularly aware. We've seen airlines, particularly flying to Lebanon, canceling their flights because they're expecting something, or they don't want to get stuck or harmed, and some airlines changing their schedules here to Israel. I'm scheduled to go. Yesterday and today, we launched an email just asking for our followers to make a donation if they wish, and we'll figure out what the needs are in that community, but to send their condolences, to send their prayers. And my plan is to go up this week to the Golan and visit as many families as I can, just to express my personal condolences and the condolences of thousands of Christians who are responding and sending their prayers as well. So I'm planning to go unless there's some all-out escalation that will prevent me from doing so.
So I've talked to people, I've interviewed people from Alma Research and other people, and I know that there is a huge concern about the situation in the north. The Gaza situation seems to be somewhat resolving itself, although I don't know that that many people have returned home to the kibbutzim that were
In most
along
cases, they have not.
in the Gaza border. So there were, safe to say, tens of thousands of people who had evacuated that area.
Correct.
I know some people in the Sderot had also left. I know some of those have returned because the rocket fire is very, very sporadic out of Gaza now. But the situation in the north is just absolutely horrific. So I've interviewed people from Alma over the last few months, Alma Research. And my understanding is there's about 80,000 people that have been evacuated from the north that
Correct.
don't live where they are. And I think I saw last week, I haven't been able to find the announcement. I have so much things flowing through my social media now. But I believe the people that had evacuated the north, internal refugees, if you will, living in hotels around Israel and Jerusalem and elsewhere, that their children were not going to go to school for another year. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. When I interviewed Avraham Levine from Alma, he told me, he said, if the war in the north breaks out, given the rocket reach that Hezbollah has and the precision, it may be that no child will go to school in any of Israel for a year because it's going to be a war. So in terms of those people having evacuated the north, have you noticed anything, in your daily life as to how that has impacted the whole of Israel, if it has?
Well, it's a very good question. And sadly, the answer is I don't notice it. I don't feel it. I was in Tiberias 2-3 weeks ago, and Tiberias now, it's July, should be packed with tourists from all over Israel enjoying the Sea of Galilee, tourists from outside of Israel. The hotels should be full, prices should be high. You shouldn't be able to find parking either, but all the hotels are filled with people who have been evacuated from communities that are not more than 20 miles, 30 miles maximum away from where they are. And as you just noted, if and when that all-out war breaks out with Hezbollah, all of Israel will be in range. So these people may be evacuated. There won't really be anywhere to evacuate to. I'll be in range. Everyone's going to be in range. And we're looking at, I've read projections of as many as 500 casualties a day on our side for an indefinite period of weeks. But the sense is that would have to be a relatively quick war, brutal kind of war where you rip the bandage off rather than pull it slowly, which is what's been happening with Hamas in Gaza over 10 months. I have not heard anything about all Israeli kids not being able to go to school. I would say in the late spring, there was a big push here in Israel. There was a lot of commentary that there needed to be a guarantee for residents in the north who have been displaced, that they would be home in their communities no later than the start of school, September 1st. That's a month away. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, because even if we were to begin that all-out war now, it's very unlikely that people will be back in their communities. So no, kids in the north who have been evacuated are not going to be starting school again in their own communities this fall. What will happen mid-year, it's undetermined. I can tell you that I've been to Sderot many times and other Gaza border communities. Back in March is when the first major return of residents from Sderot, a city of about 35,000, started to come back. And now most people are back, but they didn't begin their school year till March.
Wow. So I think that Abraham's projection was sort of like what he thought would happen. He's a military guy. He served in Gaza. by the way, I want to ask you a question that occurs to me just now. Is I know that you've had family serving in the IDF, and is everyone safe?
Oh, physically at the moment, but we're all living. I've done a lot of interviews in the last number of weeks, and I was on my most recent U.S. trip through most of June into July. And I think the common message that I'm sharing is that even if we're physically safe, there's no one in my family who's not suffering. It's not past tense, it's present tense, suffering still various levels of trauma. And it's not post-trauma, it's trauma. It's things that we are existing with. And I don't know when we will be able to add the post to the trauma, but I do know that for all of us, including, I'll say this for sure for my oldest two grandchildren who are 3 and 5, I think even for them, for the rest of their lives, they're going to carry a level of trauma with them. But we don't. It's not even over yet, so we don't know how much worse it may get. My son is going back into reserves in September. That's been planned. Does that mean that there's going to be any particular call-up or military conflict in September? I don't know, but it's scary to think that, and think as much as it was scary for him to be in Gaza, how much more so it will be scary if he has to go into Lebanon. My son-in-law in a similar situation, my daughter's boyfriend tomorrow is going into reserves for a few weeks. Maybe this is being staggered in order to not make it seem like when there is a big need, that there's not an immediate call up, to give some level of surprise to whatever we do. But again, I have no knowledge. I just can listen and process to what other people are saying.
There's been these drones that have gotten through. There was a drone from Yemen, that one or two that hit in Tel Aviv.
Correct.
And it seems, from my perspective, that Hezbollah's plan, if I read the think tank research correctly, was what Hamas did in Gaza: come across the border, kidnap people, and Hezbollah had planned to do that in the north. Now the people have evacuated. That seems to be not part of their plan, but they seem to have adapted very well to just sort of making life, I don't know how to say it because I don't live under this, making life miserable for people in the north so that they leave.
Well, so if their plan was to come into Israel and capture Israeli territory, so that has not happened yet. I've heard reports, and again, I have no experience and no inside knowledge, but reports that Hezbollah also has tunnels that cross deep into Israel. That may be true, but if that's the case, they have not employed them yet. But even without coming in and slaughtering people in communities in northern Israel, like Hamas did on October 7th, they've effectively won already, in a sense that we've evacuated some 80,000 people from communities along the northern border, which effectively cedes Israeli sovereignty over these communities. So they're not physically present, but between the short-term rockets, the long-term missiles that have GPS guidance, and I'm sure you know this, that Israel's been jamming GPS in Israel for some months now, because many of their missiles are GPS guided. So when you go north of a certain point, you can't use your GPS in your car because it'll take you to Beirut. And the drones, which have become very effective weapons. And you mentioned the one that they successfully retrofitted and flew all the way from Yemen, more than 2,000 kilometers, more than 1,100 miles from Yemen, that hit central Tel Aviv, right near the U.S. Embassy office there. So all of these are major threats. And when Hezbollah chooses to unleash it, it will be hell here for a period.
So you live in I think I could say where you live, right?
Yeah.
You live in Efrat, which is in Judea, between Bethlehem and Hebron, and beautiful community. But you live, I guess, what they would say over the green line, in a settlement that the world seems to claim is illegal. Although by the way, there's a British lawyer you should, if you've never followed her, her name is Natasha Hausdorff for UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust.
Okay.
And she's just a dynamic defender of the legalities involved. I mean, she will just, she did a debate in Canada recently with Douglas Murray, and they just destroyed the opposition. So Natasha Hausdorff, she's absolutely wonderful. I'm going to try to interview her at some point. But and you mentioned, I think, in one of our prior interviews, the concerns you have because you live in an area where there's no fence between you and the Palestinian community. So there was an American, I think he's a comedian named Zach Fox, and there was some videos that he posted on Twitter, and there was an article in the Jerusalem Post about it last week. And to summarize it, Zach went up to Ramallah, which is not that far from central Jerusalem, and he started interviewing people on video. And you can watch the video that they actually, after he was interviewing people and asking them questions, a group of men came and said, you need to delete all of that while we watch, or we're going to kill you.
Do not nice things.
Yeah, it was not nice. And they were, and he was, I think, shocked because everybody was very pro-Hamas.
Correct.
They did not support the return of the hostages, and they hated the Jews. I mean, and he said this was 100% of the people that he talked to. Now, I don't believe that everybody up there feels that way, but certainly you're not going to get a different opinion when people are walking around threatening people that are doing interviews like that. But what's your sense of the feeling in the Arab communities in Judea and Samaria about the feelings towards Israel now?
So I have virtually no interaction with our Arab neighbors anymore. There are people who work in one of the grocery stores that we go to. Most of them are Christian Arabs from Bethlehem. Unlike part of Tucker Carlson's rant a few months ago, just because one is a Christian Arab does not mean that they are not a risk or a threat. In fact, they can be more vile and hostile. So the fact that they're Christian Arabs is very nice. It doesn't tell me that they are any less hostile. What we do know from our Arab neighbors is their own surveys indicating that approximately 3 out of 4 of them support Hamas. I don't know the precise numbers, but they've done their own polls, and their polls play that out on a consistent basis. Hamas gives a sense of national pride. They may, if they acknowledge that the atrocities that Hamas committed actually took place, they deny that they took place the way they did, or that Israel it was somehow involved in killing its own people and making up stories of rape and sexual mutilation and beheading people and beheading babies and burning people alive. All of that's documented, but they don't believe it. Matter of fact, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I will. I was asked recently by a Christian non-Arab friend if I could arrange to take a Christian Arab friend of his down to the Gaza border so they could see for themselves. All of this is to say, I can't tell you for sure what the Arab street is thinking. I wasn't surprised to watch that video of people in Ramallah. Not at all. What I can tell you is that since October 7th, even along the Gaza border, where most of the communities are much more left-wing, you've seen an upending of belief in peaceful coexistence. all the more so here, where we live among them. And that doesn't mean that I and others like myself don't want peaceful coexistence. Of course we do. But I think that there's a sense that, okay, you know what? They committed an atrocity. They support that atrocity. Much of the atrocities that took place were committed either by people who worked in the Jewish communities in which they raped, murdered, and pillaged, or that they gave intelligence to the terrorists so the terrorists could do so most effectively. And as a result, there are very few people. I don't know anybody, but there are very few people where I live who ever want to see Arab workers back here in Efrat, because we don't know who's a terrorist. We don't know who is providing intelligence for terrorists, and we don't know who will be threatened by the terrorists to provide intelligence and or commit an act of terrorism against us. And I live less than a mile from the adjacent Arab village. It's called Abdullah Ibrahim. There, as you said, there's no fence between us. So if they were, I live in a 7-story apartment building, one of 5. If they were to send over 500 terrorists, and if our rapid response team was successful in getting here soon enough and killing 50% of them, there would still be 250 terrorists going floor by floor by floor in my building. And out the window that's shining in the back, there's a elementary school, a mall, and a community center. You could see in hours here, literally in hours, carnage worse than what we saw all day on October 7th. And nobody's willing to risk that now, despite the fact that I would even argue most of us believed very strongly in coexistence before.
And so, I mean, the numbers, I mean, there were tens of thousands of Arabs coming into Israel each day. There were thousands coming from Gaza into Israel each day. And I mean, do you really ever see in your lifetime, you know, I'm an old man now, or getting older, it seems like.
Well, John.
I've reached my biblical 70 limit this year. Okay. So I don't know if that's a limit or that's where you're blessed to get that much, and anything else is a double blessing. But do you see this changing in your lifetime? This what's developed really just in the last 9-10 months?
Short of my peace plan, which I know we're going to talk about, very sadly, and I mean that sincerely, no, I don't. My oldest grandson is 5, and he'll be turning 6 in the fall. When he was born, I held him, and I was the first, other than my daughter and son-in-law. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, wow, he's going to be a combat soldier just like his father. But maybe in 18 or 20 years, we won't have the need. Maybe there'll be some sort of peace, coexistence, that we won't have a need. We did already have the Abraham Accords, so that we're seeing things differently. My as hopeful as I am, and really am, and it doesn't mean I wish ill on our Palestinian Arab neighbors. I don't. But I don't see any change. I don't see now, 15 years from now, when my oldest grandson goes into the army, I don't see any realistic possibility that we won't be in the same or similar situation where at some point or another there will be flare-ups, call them wars, call them battles, call them operations, whatever you want, and they'll last 10 days to 10 months or more. And this is our existence. I will add to that, as much as it sounds like a very doomsday projection, I will say that all of this war, the massacre that took place on October 7th, and now almost 10 months since, it's not changed my faith, but it's changed how I look at the Bible and my history and our people. And when you go through reading in Exodus, when the Jewish people were attacked by the Amalekites, and in Numbers by the Moabites and the Jebusites and all the other ites, what we win. Ultimately, we win. But what it's not saying in the narrative, in the scripture, that there's a 59-year-old guy like Jonathan who's fighting alongside his 25-year-old son and his 34-year-old son-in-law, and they're fighting for the safety and existence of the Jewish people. And some died, and some were injured, and some had body parts amputated. And so I'm looking at it as just the sequel to the biblical battles that we read about and know that there's a positive outcome from. But God didn't say that those are going to stop.
Yeah, it's very sobering. So let's talk about your solution. So when we met back in February up in Michigan in Ann Arbor, you had just published, I think, an article that was in the Washington Times about Gaza and
yes,
and what your solution was, what Gaza needed for peace, and tell us what your article was about back then.
Right. So there's been a spinoff which was published last week in the Washington Times, what Netanyahu should propose for real peace in the Middle East. And what that is and what my solution is, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm glad to provide the link for that. But what that solution is it needs to be a change of heart, not a change of leadership. It can't be that they, quote unquote, what's the word that they're using? Retrofit, that's not the right word, the Palestinian Authority. They can't bring in the Egyptians and the Jordanians and the Saudis, who don't even have peace with us yet, to be responsible for peace in Gaza, because they can't be trusted partners. The Qataris have been funding this to the tune of hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars, I don't know, and certainly Iran. So there needs to be creative solution. And what my article says is that Netanyahu should have called on America's Christians, and Christians indeed around the world, to take the heavy lifting, to come to Gaza, I refer to it as an army of Christians, 100,000, 200,000 Christians, to be responsible for the entire restoration under the ground up, from where the former terrorist tunnels are all the way to the tops of new buildings that will be built, and playgrounds and hospitals and schools and everything else that any successful society needs in order to succeed. And the reason why it needs to be an army of Christians is because Christians genuinely love and want the peace and well-being for all people. I believe that. And that includes the Gazans. And it includes Israel and the Jewish people. And anyone who comes in here with that goal won't allow the Gazans to rearm and start with hate again, because it's dangerous for us, Israel and the Jewish people, but it's also dangerous for them. And my other belief in having this army of Christians come into Gaza as the solution, the website, if anyone wants more information, is called solutionforpeaceingaza.com. If anyone wants to check that out or be in touch, please do. By exposure to hundreds of thousands of Christians who love the God of Israel, who love the people of Israel, who understand that the state of Israel is part of prophecy and not some sort of foreign occupier, by exposure to that, after the devastation that they have legitimately been experiencing for these past, not just 10 months, but almost 20 years under the heel of Hamas, that maybe they will start to realize that Allah has failed them, that extremist Islam is not the right answer, and maybe they'll look for a just solution for peace. And maybe that will change their hearts. If they all become Christian, I'm for that as well. But I believe that this is the only solution. We can't have a two-state solution specifically now, because as you said, if you have all of these Palestinian Arabs who worship Hamas, you can't have them you can't have them controlling their own destiny until there's a complete, and Netanyahu spoke about this, until there's a complete restoration. It happened in Germany, it happened in Japan. These things need to happen in Gaza before there can be any peace. And I'd love someone to tell me, no, Jonathan, it's a neat idea, but you're wrong. Here's the real solution. I'm open for it. I'm looking for the solution. But as best as I can read it, and I'm not only living here for 20 years, but as a student of Israel and Middle East history,
I would have to agree with you that it's a very difficult long-term process. I think your comment, you hope that this resolves within your grandchildren's lifetime. It seems to be a very long process that we're facing. If it's just done on natural means, and I don't know that natural means are going to work, because I don't know. The situation seems to be beyond my comprehension on how to resolve it. I think you're on the right track, that it has to change hearts, but then how do you do that? And I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and others have noted in speeches recently that, my Itamar Marcus, I talked to him at the media summit when I was there in 2022. And Impact SC has done a lot of research on the books used in the Palestinian schools, and the children are trained from the cradle.
Correct.
To be this way. And so the only way to change that, it seems to be, is to completely stop that and put something new in its place.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the website, it was I'm not patting myself on the back, but it wasn't so hard to find leaders around the world, even leaders in the representatives of the Biden administration, which I don't think has the greatest vision for Israel and the Middle East, because they just parrot a two-state solution. But if you read the quotes from John Kirby and Matthew Miller in the State Department, you see even they acknowledge that there has to be a change in ideology. And one of them said that the answer is you have to give them a better idea. You have to compete with a bad idea with a better idea. And it's not just a better idea. It's not like going in and saying, hey, let's all join Amway. That's not a better idea. Maybe it's a better idea. That's not a solution. But the solution the answer is actually exposing them to Christians who love them, who truly want to see Gaza and 2 million Gazans thrive. And by the way, I do. I like to joke that in my lifetime, and maybe before my grandson goes into the army, that we'll be able to get in the car, drive an hour and a half to the Gaza beach, and get a kosher hamburger.
Yeah, when I interviewed some of the people from Alma up north, they said that we talked about a few villages right along the border on the Lebanese side, and they said we used to go over there, for a falafel or something. Everybody would go back and forth. They were almost part of the community, and now it's. I drove across that border, I think back in 2017, just to kind of get a sense of it, and. I mean, it's like you're sitting there in your home looking at the village. Now the village there has a fence in between, but that seems to be of little comfort when they're throwing rockets over your head, on top of your head. I don't know, so I guess the thing is, what would you like to see Christians who support Israel to do sort of action steps?
Action. Okay. The first, second, and third is go to solutionforpeaceingaza.com, register, share that link. It's such a new site and that's such a new concept. I have not yet put up the history page yet, but we'll get that out there, and I'm going to send the text out to people so people know what's the history. It's not just a solution, but there needs to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach. The top-down is we need to get leaders, political, civic, religious leaders in the US, certainly in Israel, and all over the world to embrace this idea, to realize that just a reflexive talk about a two-state solution is foolhardy. It's not only not practical, it's a reward for terrorism, and will just create more risk and more danger. So top-down leaders need to embrace it, but bottom up, by people registering, by people saying, hey, this is what needs to be done, by having lots of conversations like this in the media where people will then say, wow, yeah, of course that makes sense. And then they go and share the link with their elected representatives or their pastor. Let's get this dialogue happening fast, because I don't know how long we have to begin to restore Gaza. I don't know when the combat will end. If it were up to me, before even ending the combat, I would have people in on the ground starting to make a difference, starting to change, because we do see the need for that. So that's the first, second, and third approach. Get behind solutionforpeaceingaza.com. Of course, pray. People are welcome to be in touch with me. Again, I'm informed. I live here. I'm educated. It's not, I joke with people, since my degree is in international studies with a specialty in Middle Eastern studies, that living here now 2 decades, I live in my own petri dish. So I'm learning, I'm experiencing everything that I learned about, and the evolution of that, and the morphing and splitting of cells and all this other stuff. It exists, it's life, it's modern history that's connected to our ancient history. So for sure, people can be involved and be in touch. But if people want to see real change, if anyone wants to donate money, they're welcome to donate money to the Genesis 123 Foundation. We're doing good things. But that's not even my first approach. The first approach is, in order to see real change, Christians should go to solutionforpeaceingaza.com, register, and share that as widely as possible, so we get the top down and bottom up. The bottom up can affect the top, and the top down will affect actually being able to make it happen.
And hopefully there will be a point in the near future where you maybe can expand that for Solution for Peace in Lebanon.
Well, let's start with the Gaza petri dish.
Right. So, but anyway, Jonathan, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today on our Israel update, and just let you know that you're in our prayers. Any final thoughts?
I love having conversations with you. Thank you for what you do.